Good afternoon, friends. It was wonderful to be here with you. My name is Julian Johnson. I'm a longtime member of the order at this point in my life journey, and really very pleased to have the opportunity to talk to you about today's topic, science and the Rosicrucian Sanctum. I'm going to guess that many folks who are on this call today are relatively new members of the order, and I'm going to use that kind of as an assumption to some degree, though it may not be the case, I realize, for everyone who's on the call. So you think it's quite amazing the step that you've taken. For those of you recently done this, my guess is you've already begun to see the efficacy of the Rosicrucian teachings or studies in the journey you're on. It is clearly a transformative step that one has taken, and it's the beginning of really a lifelong journey. No matter what age you are, it's a lifelong journey. As long as we're on the planet, we are going through this evolution of our consciousness, and as we'll see, that's a lot of inner work. And there's a lot of work to be done. In the early parts, yeah, you can kind of fix the big things, but then soon you realize there's a lot of fine work to be done to truly make ourselves a reflection of kind of the cosmic consciousness. So anyway, congratulations on taking this step. It's a wonderful thing. Hopefully you will be able to also benefit not only yourself, but your family, and clearly all of us help benefit, as they would say, the collectivity, right? When we look at humanity as a whole, it's part of the evolution of consciousness or the expression of consciousness. But an integral part of that, in this Rosicrucian journey, is the Rosicrucian teachings, but equally so is the opportunity to kind of embark on the sanctum experience as part of it. And I was somewhat fortunate, perhaps, being introduced because my father had been a member of the order, and so I had seen his sanctum, and knew that he made regular use of it as he was studying his monographs and as well as meditating. So what might have seemed quite foreign to me if I hadn't had that introduction, fortunately, was familiar, and it made the transition and utilization of it, pretty straightforward and without question for me. But I recognized some time ago that, well, not everybody who is interested, let's say, in whatever it is that brings them to the order, which could be the mystical aspects, could be the parapsychology part, could be the mastery of life, how to figure out this life out here, that without a handbook, a really reliable kind of manual can be pretty difficult, but with one, it can be pretty good, and actually exceptionally good in reality. So people come to the order for different motivations. Not likely a lot of them thinking, gee, let me go get set something on an altar up in my house, home, apartment, corner, my bedroom, whatever the case may be, and put some candles on it, put a mirror up, and a rosy cross, and here we go. Not what most people are thinking about as their kind of next step, unless they had some exposure in some other way. So, okay, it's a fairly foreign territory of sorts. I would say this, one thing I've learned through my experience with the Rosicrucian teachings and Rosicrucian order is that there's nothing in them that's superfluous. Nothing is superfluous. Even if and you'll see this later on if you haven't already, but you go back, you'll go, oh my goodness, I can't believe that was there, right? I didn't realize the import of it, but 10 years later, you go back and read, oh my God, yes, spot on, get it, right? But nothing is superfluous, and that surely relates to the importance of setting up a sanctum, or as one of our sorors has called it, if need be, a sanctum in a box, right? So we grow up, at least in the United States, in most of our households and most of kind of, a very left brain Western culture, thinking that things like, broadly using the term ritual, or things like this in the anything of this nature, it just seems, well, what would you be doing that for? That makes no sense. I don't need that. What is that about? Right. Uh, and which is so wrong, unfortunately. But our conditioning generally does not kind of immediately lend itself to that. Also, I know as one of the concerns that I think about for members who are joining the order now, in recent years, is the thought of people reading their monograph, kicked back on their couch. One thing is reviewing it, okay, got it, right? But studying it that way, thinking that's not going to get the optimum result. So let me go into, so why I was interested in this thing is looking at what's the science, and I knew there was some elements that I kind of stumbled across, so over the years, of seeing some scientific principles clearly involved in what we're asked to do and recommended for us to do in terms of the Rosicrucian Sanctum. So that's what I wanted to spend a little time with, kind of reviewing at least some thoughts on that. I would say this: everything that I will present here has scientific empirical research that has been presented by some folks in an academic setting and published. I'm not, going to give you a list of a ton of citations, so on, but all of it has, and anybody's familiar with research papers that are kind of done in the academic peer-reviewed research, right? You see there's just a ton of references to other studies as well that document points that individuals are making or asserting in their own papers, right? So anyway, everything here has scientific evidence to support it. And as one would say, the Rosicrucian teachings and this what very often should be referred to as the primordial tradition, somehow the illumined individuals who were able to take their cosmic illumination and then begin to put it into studies that could be handed down initially orally, obviously for likely the first several thousand years, but could pass those along, that the illumination and the insight obviously transcends time, right? And so you will find modern science with a great deal of research and financial investments in research that are done worldwide in the physical sciences, just actually catching up with the truth of these statements, these teachings that we get through the Rosicrucian order, this primordial tradition. It's quite fascinating. So what I generally look at with this type of thing is, here's corroboration, but do not be limited by what modern science has come to attest, because the approach of Western science has been, if they don't have a means of measuring it, it doesn't exist, and they'll just ignore it. I mean, and boldly ignore it, which is fascinating, since they're in theory scientists and are seeking to know, as kind of where science comes from. So anyway, so we're going to talk a little bit about some science related to aspects, particularly centered on the Rosicrucian Sanctum. Here we are. Here's what we're going to cover: 4 topics. The psychological and mystical effects of ritual, the effects of candlelight, the use of a mirror in a Rosicrucian sanctum, and the sanctum's vibratory environment. So actually, on this first topic, the psychological and mystical effects of ritual, particularly on the first part of that, the psychological effects of ritual, I was actually quite shocked, stunned by how much empirical research there is on ritual. Totally, I mean, I had no idea. I thought it would be kind of lean, and actually is voluminous, the amount of research that's been around ritual and ritual's effects. So let's kind of look at some of these things. And I'm going to read a little Wikipedia definition up here. It says, a ritual is a sequence of activities involving gestures, words, actions, or revered objects. Rituals may be prescribed by the traditions of a community, including a religious community. Rituals are characterized but not defined by formalism, traditionalism, invariance, rule governance, sacral symbolism, could be sacral, but so I believe sacral, and performance, right? So let's get to the top of that again. It's a sequence of activities involving gestures, words, actions, or revered objects. They can come from a variety of different sources, but generally they are characterized by formalism. There's a kind of a way that you do whatever the ritual is. And it carries obviously a tradition forward. It's invariable very often, and it's performed. So in our sanctums, we were asked to perform these small rituals, and keep in mind that rituals are a feature of all known human societies. All known human societies. So when we kind of, maybe some of us might have, and hopefully you're better than me, kind of, oh, what's this? Realizing this is actually universal. It's not something that Rosicrucianism kind of just kind of add to the mix. It is universal throughout human societies. Actually, some people have written to suggest, well, is it an innate kind of characteristic of humans? That because we all, no matter the society, bring forth these rituals. And rituals can be a wide range of things. So it's a reasonable question, is this just an innate characteristic of kind of human consciousness? So when you're asked to perform a ritual or to participate in a ritual in a chapter, a lodge, or praenas, et cetera, or through an initiation, realize this is not something foreign. This is actually as natural as breathing and as universal as breathing in human societies. The poo-pooing or the dismissal of these things is what's kind of unhuman or inhuman or non-human. So understand that there's a way of tapping into our psyches that ritual enables humans to do, and therefore we do them. We did it before there was, scientific inventions. We did it before there was examination of, well, what does it mean and where do they fit in? It's kind of came forth predating all those things. So it is very human, and therefore really an expression of our own nature. So there's a good reason to embrace our nature, not to reject it. But so rituals are a feature of all human societies. They include not only the worship rites and sacraments of organized religions and cults, but also rites of passage, atonement, purification rites, oaths of allegiance, dedication ceremonies, coronations, presidential inaugurations, marriages, funerals, and more. So just step back and realize we're doing rituals and participating in rituals all the time. And they feel like they belong to us. We feel kind of at one with them, comfortable with them, because they really just reflect our own human heritage and our own human nature. No matter, again, whether in kind of modern Western societies and thinking sometimes, particularly the kind of materialistic scientist, thinking, well, these things are meaningless. No, they're just actually missing the boat, but they'll usually, eventually they catch up. And rituals can be personal and individualized, secular or sacred. Right, so these are all kind of characteristics of rituals. Now let's kind of look at some of the kind of effects of rituals. Right, so they play an important personal and social psychological role. Right, or social and psychological roles. There's a personal role they play and a social role that they play that kind of gets to the human psyche. So according to multiple research studies, right, performance of rituals and personal rituals here in particular, right, focus attention and intention, reduce anxiety and increase confidence, and improve performance. Now that last one is somewhat indisputable because it's kind of very empirical and objective. The other ones also are, because they're supported by various psychological tests and assessments, but literally just improving performance which you can see with your own eyes and your own experience. So it's not, so baseball players getting up to the plate, and then someone estimated that at least half, if not 80% of baseball players have a ritual before they come to bat, have some sort of ritual. I was reading Michael Jordan, apparently, and I presume he had a lot of fresh pairs, under his Chicago Bulls uniform, under his the shorts, he also wore a pair of North Carolina ones, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, which is where he plays a college undergrad, right? So lots of people have these rituals, and you find a lot in competitive sports. People have certain rituals. So what it has been shown, though, is that literally people will perform better on whatever the test might be by reducing their anxiety, increasing their confidence. So you will find most of the writing, and there's tons of books on it. Go to YouTube, you can find some long videos on it, short videos, long videos, etc. But there are actually numerous books done by professors looking at how to use, how to augment your life with rituals, your personal life, not religious rituals or mystical rituals, but just rituals, and how those things can basically, apparently, by drawing our attention away from the extraneous things that very often will preoccupy us and concern us, right? Because just random thoughts, about tomorrow, yesterday, about this, that, and the other, that the focusing of attention moves us away from those thoughts that produce anxiety, usually, because usually the thoughts that dominate our minds under the situations that would produce anxiety, or all the what ifs and all the fears. Right? So they literally improve performance. So what I recommend to you, and yes, at the end of this, I've got a couple of references kind of broadly on the topics, but just go in and Google or go to Amazon and type in rituals and look at the books. But there's lots of people who are looking at how you can improve your everyday life through the use of rituals that you can develop yourself. Actually, there are also people who've written extensively on how to develop rituals, right? What kind of ingredients most helpful, etc. Right? So that's on a personal basis. I just would recommend it to you because it clearly is something that has been shown to be very useful. Yes, most of us have a little ritual. Here's what we do, before we go to bed. We brush our teeth, we do this, that, and the other, etc. We might have a ritual we first do in the morning, salutation, point of arising, or whatever the ritual might be. But you can look at how to make use of rituals to reduce anxiety, and some of the examples you will see in some of the research is we'll have people perform a task and have one group kind of do a little ritual beforehand that they kind of create, and that's created for them, and another group not, and just look at the number of errors, et cetera, in the two groups' different performance of the task. Right, and seeing that people who use the ritual, not a mystical one, etc., but have better performance. So there's also on a group basis, rituals are used, right? So there's a lot of things that we could mention here, but I'll just kind of get some of the highlights here. So one thing is they solidify group identity, right? So generally, very often, how you can tell people of one faith from another, right, is their rituals. But it's also a secular identity. If you think about when you go to a professional athletic, Major League Baseball or football, etc., and where you have people sing the national anthem, or you go to certain meetings that are not terribly far from where I live now in Pennsylvania. There's a meeting I tend to go to, a homeowners meeting kind of bit, and they will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Right, these are all things at looking at how to create a secular identity. Right, but then you could look at lots of religious and cultural ones where they're just passed on as cultural traditions, and forming a strong group identity through these shared kind of ritual activities. Right, most people, whether if you have a religious faith, there's a whole bunch of different ritual activities, rites of passage. If Christianity, you got baptism. you might have Holy Communion and confirmation if you're kind of certain parts of the Catholic denominations and so on. So marriage obviously is a ritual, right? It's a ritual, right? It's not necessary, but it's done in order to one, it binds the community around it, but it also kind of raises to another level of intention the participants in that ceremony, right? So we have those things as well. But then there's also rituals that are used for therapeutic purposes, right? Both physiological and psychological. So you will find in a number of societies where people will perform certain rituals aimed at bringing about a physiological change, and just even by invoking the placebo effect, which I presume most people might be familiar with, which is basically, where the mind will just kind of create the biological reality in our bodies and restoring them to harmony, because the mind believes that that pill you gave them is real medicine. It's not just a sugar pill, right? But that's the placebo effect, and these rituals, at their least, when they're used for physiological purposes, can invoke the placebo effect, and people actually can experience "quote unquote" healing of biological and physiological problems. They're also used obviously for psychological purposes, right? Various rituals that people might go through in order to purge themselves of what are perceived as negative thoughts and wrongful things, etc. Or just again, rite of passage. If you look at the some of the military services, right, they will put the recruits through certain rituals in effect, right, to bring about a certain psychological state of mind. So they have a number of effects in these ways. I wanted to share with you a piece of summary of research. It's quite interesting. The title of it is "How Ritual Might Create Religion." So it is the gentleman who is the author of this thing, Dr. David W. Jones. He's now at Rutgers University, but PhD in clinical psych from Rutgers, doctor of psychology from Rutgers, PhD from Brown University, MDiv from Cambridge University and Cambridge Episcopal Theological School, and a BA. So very well, traditional academic, strong academic credentials. And this particular piece that he wrote, he focuses on, he's really summarizing for his colleagues in his paper from the Archive for the Psychology of Religion, of looking at how ritual affects both our physical, mental, and emotional states. So one of the things that, and this is, I would say, quite germane. There's a lot of stuff. There's a 17-page paper, but I pulled out a few things that are particularly germane, I think, for our Rosicrucian activities. One is that bodily activity affects cognitive and emotional processing. And so if you ever attend a Rosicrucian convocation, you're asked to perform certain very kind of simple ritualistic acts, right? Not complicated acts and so on. And you're asked to do them in a certain manner. What's very interesting is there's a good deal of research showing how bodily activity and posture and a number of things like this actually affect cognitive and emotional processing. So I'm asking you to, based on this type of research, but to assume that there's a method to the madness, a method behind the practice when you're asked to do certain ritualistic things, even in your own sanctum, right? You can read this guy's 17-page paper, which is quite good, and there's other people have written on because he quotes a whole bunch of other people, refers to a whole bunch of other people as well in their research. But there is physical motion. The body processes things both intellectually and emotionally, very much related to the physical body. So there's a neurological connection, they say, between bodily activity and cognition, well demonstrated now. And what's interesting here, so you've got a guy, straight ahead academic, who notes in this particular paper that ritual has the potential to bring about a transformation and perhaps expansion of our ordinary sensory and cognitive processes. And one example that he actually begins his paper with is looking at the dervishes and the dance and movement and how that truly brings about a transformative state. Those of us who have spent more time at this can see very evidently how, without dancing, being a whirling dervish, a ritual can bring about a transformation in of our awareness. And matter of fact, I like to say it should, if done correctly, it will. And that correct has to do with a lot of things, but it's the case of it. So he said, ritual activity has the potential to provide its own sensory inputs and ways of processing information. So, so I'm asking you, in a sense, not to casually disregard or to dismiss this aspect of the Rosicrucian activity. Some of us who've been at this, say, for a while, and many who maybe have just started at it, but they kind of are open in some ways to this, can tell you about the profound impact that rituals done with consciousness can have upon the consciousness of both the participants and then the observers. So these are tools that have been used for thousands of years all over the world to bring about these changes in consciousness. Now, the real business is trying to get out of the objective sensory-dominated consciousness through our five senses, which is really the tip of the iceberg of who and what we are. Right? It's the tip of the iceberg, but we're so dominated by it, that's all we think there is. And when we kind of go into these rituals and things of this nature, we start to get this response from this part of inside of ourselves that objectively we wouldn't have known was there. So we got, because you don't get to the mystical goals that you, let's say, you can aspire to through Rosicrucianism and other pathways similar to it, through the intellect. You can be really erudite, really knowledgeable, can talk a lot about it, but that doesn't get you to the goal. Just makes you, I don't know, you could write papers, etc. So, it's very intellectual, it's good, but that's not how you get to the goal. So that's all kind of to say, let's think seriously about it. Now we'll look at, from our own point of view as Rosicrucian students, and I'm hoping it's all still working, looking at the mystical effect of ritual, right? So you move from a focus on the conventional sensory processing to awareness of a more subtle aspect of our world, which is usually overwhelmed by attention to the gross sensory inputs, right? And that's just really the way, for better or worse, we kind of function. So ritual allows us, mystical rituals, to kind of move away from just taking in. I mean, these five objective senses, they take in such a finite piece of the universe. Even as physicists will tell you that, or scientists will tell you that, right? Tiny, tiny bit. I mean, it's ridiculous compared to the expanse of the vibratory nature of the universe, right? And that's not including actually some things that science hasn't yet got to on that vibratory scale. But the idea is, how do we move our focus away from these sensory inputs, objective consciousness, because that's not where the stuff is. You've got to go inside. Inside is just the rest of us, the rest of the iceberg. Rituals done, reasonably well, raise the individuals and the group state of consciousness. And you may not have experienced this yet. I'm hoping you will soon if you haven't. People very often, Rosicrucians and others, but surely Rosicrucians use the term very often about vibrations, where you can basically alter the kind of not simply the brain waves, but surely the perceptions of that you're sensitive to in your environment through this kind of ritual work. It, as we know, can stimulate transcendent experiences. Then I would say that's another one of those guaranteed. It could be with a small t, transcendent, or a large t, a medium t. But when you have some of those experiences, it's enough to bring you back. That's what happens. It brings you back. You go, Well, let me get that again, right? Come for the vibrations, come for that raising of your consciousness. So this back to Dr. Jones, this, I think is the last word from Dr. Jones for today. But some of those powerful effects of sacred ritual. Now, here's what's very interesting point he makes here, right? And he's making this to his academic colleagues and peers, right? Says that some of those powerful effects may only be available to those willing to engage kind of the relevant disciplines, such as Rosicrucian as an example, and may become more accessible as the individual continues in those practices, and that is the case. So the person who's only going to look at it from outside and kind of refuse to for whatever reason, right, just doesn't step inside to experience it, won't even know it exists, won't even know this other experience of the world and the universe exist. And the more you do that, come and kind of play with this aspect of self and your being, is the more basically your awareness of it and ability to operate in it grows. So he actually, at the end of this paper, which I'll cite the statistic, the relevant information at the end of this, he kind of says, well, one of the most, maybe perhaps the unfortunate part is to his colleagues that it may only be available to those willing to engage to actually find these effects. So if you just poo-poo it, you're never going to find it. So you just won't know. But eventually we all kind of get to the same place slowly or quickly. So that's it kind of on rituals. I'm sorry, this is not kind of a Q&A thing here, but I hope that's at least encourage you to think more about it. So the effects of candlelight. This is actually the one I've got more passing scientific references on as compared to people trying to figure exactly, I guess, how to do a very hard measurement. Well, one of the things that they know that it produces relaxation and calmness. Right, so exposure to the soft flickering light of a candle can trigger biologic responses that allow for relaxation and calmness. And that's the difference, is it's not just a dim room, which actually can make people anxious, right? Can't see a lot, etc. But candlelight kind of said, you feel safe in that environment. And how they measure that is one key aspect is the reduction of the stress hormone cortisol, which can be achieved through the calming effect of candlelight. So they can measure your cortisol levels, right, which, the stress hormone, and they can see. So yes, it promotes relaxation, helps to enhance mood. So it also, flickering light of a candle can induce a meditative state due to a decrease in brainwave activity. So those are, it's a soft thing, candlelight, but there's, again, the Rosicrucian stuff, in a sense, I would say it, whatever, knows what it's doing. It's not, Rosicrucian studies are not throwing random stuff at people, which is so fascinating to me. It's so well thought out. It so well understands where humans are and how to get humans to another state. This, broadly put, the primordial tradition, as it's called, but you'll see that. So again, try to take heed. You're embarking on a journey to go within, to reach the divine within you more consciously, right? And you won't get that through the objective senses. That doesn't produce it, right? You have to be willing to say, okay, I'm now going to go and try and hear the still small voice, right? Listen to this thing inside my own being and turning my attention. And it, initially it may seem like, well, how do I do that? But if you take these steps, it just naturally will occur. You won't, it's kind of like learning how to do something through doing it. You may not be able to describe how to exactly tell somebody else how to, bowl the perfect bowling ball or whatever, but you know how to do it because you kind of went down this journey, even though you might be able to articulate it perfectly for somebody else. So take advantage of these things. One of another kind of wonderful part is the Rosicrucian Sanctum mirror, right? Like, I think a lot of people go, what's that for? Etc. About 15 years ago or so, stumbled across a piece of research which happened to note that individuals are more honest when they were, tasked with something and told don't do X, but but not being observed, post that, if they were in the presence of a mirror or a reflective surface. And that was the first thing that kind of pointed out to me. There's scientific work that gets at what we can experience as Rosicrucians using the mirror in our sanctum, having the mirror in our sanctum. And so let's dig a little deeper into it. Now, this is kind of, I'm going to read this quickly because it's more a backdrop of sorts, but say the mirror has played an extraordinary role in the transgenerational development of human consciousness by helping to change the self-identity of humans, as well as to modify the mind, brain in relationship to the self. The mirror's uniqueness is due to the double function of the eyes, both visual sensors and organs of the body. Thus, a subject sees itself in the act of seeing. The specificity of mirrors resides in producing the consciousness of being into the reflected object, that is, the subject of reflection. So this is actually research that goes back to 1968 by the particular researcher, Malu Ponte. So we can unpack that a little bit. One of the ways that self-consciousness is identified in other animal species is by being able to identify themselves in a mirror. And the test, as many of you likely know on this call, is very often by placing a dot, a painted dot, does not harm the animal, blah, 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 on the forehead of the animal, and then putting a mirror in front of them and determining whether they realize that's them, or do they think there's just another animal there to, that they might have to, defend themselves from or attack. And has been seen with dolphins, elephants, and a number of other animals. They recognize that's them. They become self-conscious. They are self-conscious. So the mirror is one of those ways, right? As we know through our own experience, we never hear ourselves as others hear us, right? The chamber of our skull and our ears changes the way that we hear ourselves versus how a third party hears us. So most of us, the first time we heard ourselves in a recording, then what's that? Who's that? What's the matter with that recording? Right? Well, no, that is how we sound. And the mirror is this thing he's pointing out. It allows us, it promotes, in a sense, this transgenerational development of human consciousness by helping to change the self-identity of humans. So being able to see self and recognize self, right? So the mirror's uniqueness is due to the double function of the eyes, right? The eyes, both the visual sensors and the organs of the body. So basically you have this, we use our eyes to see ourselves using our eyes, right? So thus the subject sees itself in the act of seeing. The specificity of mirrors reside in producing the consciousness of being into the reflected object, the subject of reflection. So they've got various ways that they also further measure that. Go into here a little bit. So they say historical documents of spirituality and divination in ancient Greek, the language, together with poetic and artistic testimonies of Dionysian rituals, indicate that, quote, mirroring, unquote, in a specular metal or glass surface successfully replaced gazing at water or oil surfaces, which is common in ancient Egypt and the Orient. Mirrors were used in mystery school initiations during Orphic and Dionysian rituals. So again, what the Rosicrucian studies are presenting to you is not pulled out of the air, right? It's not some arbitrary stuff. Really, you were being presented with the tools. The tools. So if you go back, you figure they've been doing this for a few thousand years. People are using them these ways. There's something here. So, do not take it for granted. They're part of your tools, part of your evolutionary tools. And this actually comes from a paper called Mirror and Eye Gazing, an integrated review of induced, alternate, anomalous experiences. And it was from this journal, Imagination, Cognition, and Personality, Consciousness and Theory, Research and Clinical Practice, 2021. But we're going to go a little deeper and a little further into this particular aspect. So it's been noted that the social implications of self-awareness were demonstrated by Duval and Wicklund, 1972, the theory of objective self-awareness, which suggests that bringing awareness to our own existence through the use of a mirror can increase our self-evaluation and heighten sensitivity to social and moral norms, rules, and standards. Furthermore, inducing self-awareness in adults increases the likelihood of adults taking the perspective of another person. So that's a lot going on there about a mirror. So I'm going to read that again. You can let me read it too, but I'll read it again. So the social implications of self-awareness were demonstrated by Duval and Wicklund's 1972 theory of objective self-awareness, which suggests that bringing awareness to our own existence, example, through the use of a mirror, can increase our self-evaluation and heighten sensitivity to social and moral norms, rules, and standards. Furthermore, inducing self-awareness in adults increases the likelihood of adults taking the perspective of another person. So those two research papers you could look up and see exactly how they measured it, but they're all well documented, of being able to measure this change in self-evaluation, heightened sensitivity, and a little bit likely around the honesty piece is due to this heightened sensitivity to social and moral norms, rules, and standards. Now, it's also kind of fascinating. Inducing self-awareness in adults increases the likelihood of adults taking the perspective of another person. I'm like, huh, would have thought that, right? I didn't. What's interesting, though, is that you'll see a little bit later, as we, a couple of slides later, about some exercise related to the mirror. The mirror can be a tool to generate self-compassion, and usually when you have compassion for yourself, you'll have compassion for others. And when you have compassion for others, you will develop compassion yourself. So anyway, interesting tool. So here we go. Mirror, mirror on the wall. This is the source here. Increasing young children's honesty through inducing self-awareness. The Journal of Experimental Psychology, March of 2028. So here's what they found in this particular study. Lie-telling behaviors increased during the preschool years. Now, I think most of us can remember when we were kids, really young kids, saying some crazy lies that only a 4-year-old would think an adult would believe, because the lie was like so preposterous, right? So anyway, lie-telling behaviors increased during the preschool years. Kids are little liars, right? But inducing self-awareness through the use of a mirror reduces lie-telling behaviors with preschoolers. So in the study, children in the self-awareness condition, basically with the mirrors, were significantly more likely to tell the truth about peeking. So they were advised, I'm going to put this here, I'm going to go out of the room, but don't look at it, right? So that would say, don't peek. So the ones with the mirror were significantly more likely to tell the truth about peeking compared with those in the promise, meaning they said, oh, I promise I won't. And the control conditions would basically just walk out of the room, tell them don't do it, and they walk out of the room and see what they do. So you got to go like, huh, right? Something to this mirror stuff. So for those who were Walt Disney fans back in the day, I think it was Snow White, mirror, mirror on the wall, right? Mirror's talking to you. Variety of things around this thing of the mirror. Then you look at the whole thing of, oh God, what's the story where the person is aging in the mirror, they keep doing wrong stuff and they kind of keep aging in the mirror. Mirrors, something to it. So now here's another interesting feature of mirrors. This is again looking at an induced alternate anomalous experiences, right? Using a mirror. So mirror gazing, and this is from again the journal Imagination, Cognition, Personality, etc. Mirror gazing produce anomalous experiences. Anomalous meaning odd, not normal. Experiences almost exclusively in the visual, bodily, and self-identity modalities. So people either felt something in the body or visual, right? And something to do with self-identity. Who's that in the mirror, basically? And I'll describe it a little bit more. So mirror gazing is basically where you look at yourself in the mirror, but you're not looking for, oh, gee, do I have a pimple there or a hair there or whatever else. You're gazing into one's eyes, not staring so much, but gazing into your eyes in the mirror. Not straining, but just gazing. And I will share with you an experience that I had, happened to me along this line, is that one day, just kind of, I was walking, just was in the bathroom of my apartment where I lived, and washing my hands, and I said, oh, something said to me, look in the mirror and look at that person in the mirror like I was walking up to that person on the street. What would I think of? Who would I think that person was? What would I make of that person? Right? It was just a spontaneous idea that kind of, and it relates, you'll find it in the monographs ultimately. But it was an idea that occurred. And this is where I talk about, the monographs and the sanctum, because you will find, if you haven't already, study something in the monographs, never happened to you before, 2 days later it happens to you, right? Or you encounter, right? The other part is, you're reading your monographs and boom, something happens to you. Like if your study night's on Thursday, it happens to you on Tuesday night or Tuesday, that's in the monographs, right? That's the stuff in here, right? You're playing with the unconscious. That's where the game is, right? The objective consciousness is not where it's at. It will leave you distracted and confused as all, people are only focused on that R, right? Because there's just so many possibilities, you can never answer it all, et cetera, right? But anyway, so this thing about mirror gazing. So you're just basically gazing in the eyes of the image in the mirror. Now, what's interesting, these are scientists that have nothing to do with mysticism, none of this stuff. That's not their interest. They're just like interesting as psychologists, right? And you can see the journal they publish it, right? So on average, within 2 minutes of mirror eye gazing, you will get some anomalous, people typically get anomalous phenomena, right? You go, and that can, now I would say that, it can be a range of phenomena, right? Obviously, if something scares you, likely, then it's the wrong thing. But most people, back off a little bit or whatever. But you will find it can be so startling. And I know a member who also kind of did it with, and it was so startling because, observing, other images of personalities that, but eventually she came comfortable with it, and, she would make use of it to look at what, was elicited, right, through that type of eye gazing. So mirror eye gazing was effective for eliciting altered states or anomalous experiences. So that has nothing to do with Rosicrucianism, straight up, but there's a tool there. One thing I would say to you with anything you encounter in Rosicrucianism, generally don't go down into the rabbit hole. Don't get lost in the rabbit hole, right? Whether it's, trying to do psychic phenomena, try to do eye gazing, trying to, move, matchsticks with your mind, try to, whatever it is, right? Don't get lost in that, because that's not the purpose, right? These are just kind of artifacts of consciousness, right? Which where we're really seeking is the mystical experience, which is basically direct knowledge, more and more direct knowledge of the divine nature that we are the expression of. And when you get that, everything else you get, right? It's a good Jesus line. He said, seek ye first the kingdom and his righteousness, and all things will be added unto you. It really is true. So, don't get distracted. These are tools, they're useful, right? But don't go down a rabbit hole and you kind of lose sight of what you came for. So I want to share with you this. This is mirror eye gazing and self-compassion research. This woman, her name is Tara Well, a professor at Columbia University, Barnum College, which is, one of the United States' most prestigious institutions, Ivy League institutions. And I would recommend to you, looking into not only her, but there are many others just like her, who have looked at how, because she has no interest in mysticism, that's not what she's about, right? But looking at how it helps produce self-compassion, right? Self-acceptance. Crazy. Who would have thought it, right? Wow, that doing that. But initially maybe goes from, oh, gee, look at that pimple there or that hair there, to somehow or another, it winds up eliciting compassion of us toward that person in the mirror, which is ourself. So anyway, let's share her stuff a little bit here. You get you get, and here's what basically some of the research was, and I'll read it kind of quickly, then we'll go to a little short video. So the study was a 10-day, this is one of many studies she did, but the one that's kind of featured here. The study was a 10-day longitudinal experiment, meaning over time. Participants, numbering 44 individuals, did 10 minutes of silent mirror gazing 8 times over a 10-day period. So 10 minutes of silent mirror gazing 8 times over a 10-day period. Not every day, but almost every day. And before they did it, and after, they took the measures of stress and anxiety for the DOS, which is, diagnostic scale of something, and the self-compassion 12-item scale from NEF, 2003. They were taken before and after the mirror gazing intervention. Participants reported significant, meaning when they were measured, when they were tested, reported significant decreases in stress, anxiety, and depression, and an increase in self-compassion through this practice, right? So let's go hear from Dr. Tara Well.
Hello, my name is Tara Well. I'm a motivational psychologist and a professor at Barnard College. One of the things that we discover when we first look in the mirror is we tend to treat ourselves as objects, okay? We're just basically fixing our appearance so we can look presentable to go out in the world. Through mirror meditation, looking at oneself or gazing at oneself, I tend not to use the word staring, because staring implies that there's kind of like a harshness to the way people are looking. And in fact, when people first begin looking at themselves, they oftentimes have a very harsh, piercing look, because oftentimes we tend to be very critical. We're kind of scanning ourselves, looking for that thing that's wrong that needs to be fixed, or making sure everything's okay, making sure we're not leaving ourselves open to any kind of criticism before we go out into the world. But over the course of time, over the course of sitting with oneself for 10 minutes, gazing, letting one's impressions sort of wash over your eyes instead of going and examining oneself, actually changes people's perceptions. People begin to realize how cruel they are to themselves, just downright cruel in terms of the kinds of criticisms they have about their appearance, and the harshness with which they evaluate themselves and look at themselves. So I oftentimes encourage people to shift their focus from being the person who's criticizing the person in the mirror to being the person who's receiving that criticism. Look into the eyes of the person who's receiving the criticism. And oftentimes that's when the first shift really occurs, where people realize that, that in a number of ways they may think that they have high self-esteem and feel great about themselves, but there are ways that they're really not on their own side. There are ways that they're really very unkind to themselves. So it's a very, very practical tool that one can use and on a daily basis that makes a huge difference in the quality of one's own life and the quality of life of those around you.
So I think everything is working. I would recommend you go online, Google. There's a lot of people who basically have created various versions of kind of mirror meditations, that would call it loosely. And you'll see that people are using it quite for therapeutic purposes. Why, obviously, bringing it up here is that there's the mirrors part of your toolkit, right? And it can be used in a variety of helpful ways beyond what we're looking at here from a mystical kind of studies point of view. But it's part of your toolkit and an important part of your toolkit. Because again, the goal that you're reaching for, you can't intellectually, you don't get there through purely, great intellectualism. That doesn't do it. So you don't need that either, right? That's the beauty of it, right? Because it is about sensing self and spending more time with self. And obviously that person in the mirror, that's part of the self. And in our Rosicrucian language, you'll encounter, if you haven't already, where it talks about self unto self will speak, right? Self unto self will speak. So the mirror is a tool for that, along with the candles, etc. So the last point I want to touch on with us is about the sanctum's vibratory environment. So this is going to get a little esoteric of sorts. And I can't, there's a little scientific stuff actually that supports this too. As kind of as unique as this, and to be found largely in things where people are studying that those things are the kind of the soul or the spirit of the psyche. So if you've attended a Rosicrucian chapter or chapter or large convocation, you have heard the words, you may not recall them, but you likely do, that a temple is made sacred by our thoughts and conduct. So I remember the first time hearing those, it was like, really? What? I thought, the bricks, it's a church, right? It's the, I had never thought that this notion that our thoughts and conduct would be the things that would matter, would have an effect, would make it sacred, quote unquote, right? We just, I think, normally think, okay, we built a church as a structure, so okay, therefore it is, right? But this is true. This line right there, temple made sacred by thoughts and conduct, is absolutely true. Absolutely. There's such power in these teachings that fascinating. It's an understatement, I guess, in reality. So anyway, made sacred by thoughts and conduct. So if you think about the sensation one feels when one walks into a church, temple, or mosque of one's faith. Now, what's interesting about this, not every, maybe if you visit enough of these type of establishments or edifices, you'll walk into some and some you walk in and say, wow, I really feel something here. And others, not so much. And I had a wonderful experience a very long time ago, relatively speaking, about 20 years ago. We went on the Rosicrucian Egyptian trip, and we went, I guess, about 2002. And we had seen all the, the things that we all came to see, the pyramids and the other stuff, right? And some other things. And on our last day, we were back in Cairo, and they opened up a mosque for us, right? One of the larger mosques in Cairo was opened up to us. We had spent a lot of time, checking out the vibes here, the vibes there, and trying to sense all those things and feel those things and doing, things of that nature. And it was so fascinating because we had spent about 2 weeks almost, or a week to 2 weeks kind of, with that between the tour guides and our own kind of inclination, trying to, let's figure this out. And we were admitted, I don't know if it was 20 of us, whatever was on the trip, admitted into kind of a room right adjacent to the main kind of floor of the mosque, and it was empty. There was no one else in there, and we went to meditate for a few minutes. So we did in a lot of places, and everybody felt the quote unquote vibrations there. And I won't, I'm sorry, I would take you to too much detail, perhaps, to point out to you how we all recognize the difference between that and some other places where we were trying to hope there were some great vibrations, right? We walked in, then we sat down in to meditate, and you could just feel it. And what's interesting, back to the point that gentleman, Dr. Jones, makes, as you more go down this type of road, you also become more able to sense and experience these things, right? But if you take, as we often can do, I had an experience a long time ago, the first time visiting Italy, and I went to St. Patrick's, I'm not saying St. Peter's, right? Can't miss it. Okay, going to St. Peter's. And I was raised Roman Catholic, so, it wasn't a foreign place to me, the idea. And I was surprised, what I didn't feel in my time in there now. I was in there, I don't know, maybe 15 minutes, you kind of do a little walking around, etc. And one of the hosts that I was with, a couple of days later, we went instead to a small church, I'd maybe say around Assisi, right? And it was a small church. And I was so struck by the moment I walked in it, of being able to feel that same energy like I eventually felt in that mosque, right? So, and partly the problem like with St. Peter's is you got 10,000 tourists walking through there taking pictures and selfies and talking, etc. Temples made sacred by our thoughts and conduct, and it really is their vibrations, is energy. that, it's like vibraturgy you get in the Rosicrucian monographs, and I think the atria degree, you get an atria degree where this notion that something held, will take on the vibrations. And actually, if you look at some aspects now of deep in the physics, they would also say that these things keep, it keeps some of the quality of whatever they've exposed to throughout their history, right? But let's just go to vibraturgy. So that's also true with these environments, right? So in our sanctum, if you're able to, and not everybody's able to, and I will just tell you in my journey, my first sanctum, I like to say, was a pie plate crate that I found on the street, right? Found on the street, and you could, apparently they delivered pies in it, and it was like 10 on each side, so the thing was about 2 feet tall, whatever, but maybe about a foot deep, about 3 feet wide. And I grabbed it off the street, and that became, put a little cloth over it, that became my sanctum, my bedroom, right? I was, had my candles and put up there when I was, doing my sanctum period. And so I guess you would kind of call that a sanctum in a box, right? I would assemble it there. But when I would use it, I could feel about being someplace else. I also had, fortunately in my journey, a couple of walk-in closets over many years, some apartments, walk-in closet was, good sanctum, right? And those ones generally, you develop vibrations in there. Matter of fact, I can recall, 2 occasions, my cat, who just, you left that door open, that cat was definitely sitting up on that altar. When you look at the cat, she's up on the altar, sitting down. Vibrations just were there. So we kind of, to the extent we can, create these vibrations through our thoughts and conduct. So if you're able to set up a little part, even if you can, even if it's a sanctum in a box, you can, you will set up through that ritual and that habit and light those candles where you kind of, it's like flicking a bunch of switches on in yourself, right? Where you can create that experience. Because, my earliest days, I said it was just in a box, and I could have powerful feelings of that over time, despite that, yes, I would have to take it down, go back to, it's just my bedroom, for the rest of the week. So I want to explain, share some other things with you. Peer studies. So the peer lab was the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab at Princeton University. It was there about almost 25 years or so. It closed up about 10 years ago, I'd say. And they did, one of the researchers there did a bunch of studies looking at how random event generators could be affected in different circumstances by people who were meditating. And I'll give you just the crux of it, was that for instance, they found a number of Egyptian temples. They did research in actually 3 temples in Egypt. And 2 of the 3, there were pronounced effects that they could measure on affecting these, what they call random event generators, which normally produce random strings of numbers, but under certain influences, you could bring some order to that where they are not perfectly random. And it can be measured. I mean, statistically enough that you can publish papers on it and be located at Princeton University doing it, right? So this thing of vibrations and doing with meditators in a room, and I see I misspelt meditators, they're mediators, but that too, I'm sure they're good. So in our Rosicrucian Sanctum, we create a unique vibratory condition. It is like a doorway to our inner self, right? Which is really our unconscious, this other part of our being. It's not, our unconscious is conscious, we're just not conscious of it. Right, keep in mind, it's like highly conscious, right? It knows what you're gonna do before you do it. Matter of fact, in laboratory experiments, they can show you, it knows what you're gonna do before you do it. Before you think you responded, consciously, literally because they can measure it, already the body's going to respond because you're unconscious. So your unconscious is conscious, you're just not conscious of it, right? It runs the whole body, does all this other stuff. And that's that deep intelligence that's connected to the cosmic and the life force in us. Also, these vibrations allow us to connect with higher vibrational energies of our inner self and the cosmic. And last thought on that subject, look at your sanctum as an opportunity, and this is as value. It's funny, somebody put it to me, actually was a member the other day, he said it to me, and it was really great. It really just, this intimate private communion with the God of your hearts, right? Call it prayer, it's communion, it's talking, it's a communication with the God of your heart, right? And we were talking about how meditation is and this in a intimate communion are the two sides. And prayer is typically it's not necessarily a prayer of like get me a toaster or get me a car, but communion, right? That these are the two sides of it, and that this prayer or this intimate communication is like the fuel then that you use to raise up your meditation, right? And she put it to me very she said one is talking to God, the other is listening to God, right? So talking to God is the prayer, listening to God is the meditation, right? So your sanctum provides an opportunity. If you do it for 2 minutes, a minute, 5 minutes, doesn't matter, right? Because the more you're in a sense, you're trying to build fiber between your consciousness and that thing that has brought us into being, right? The God of our heart, God of our realization. So anyway, these are some resources. There Ritual Effects, the book just recently came out. Man and the Symbols by Carl Jung. Everyone knows who he is, I presume. Great psychologist. The Power of Myth by Joseph Campbell, brilliant stuff. Power of Rituals by this gentleman Casper de Tool. This paper I've cited here is by Dr. James Jones, and the Healing Symbols in Psychotherapy, which is another. It's actually a series of books that this guy has around related to rituals and healing and symbols in psychotherapy, named Eric Godwin. But there's a good one. There's a ton of stuff. Just Google it. I'm sorry, I could likely listed 3 or 4 pages of this stuff in reality, but who would have time to read it? So, okay, that is it. And I want to say thank you all for being here. Sorry, I ran a little longer than anticipated, by me at least, and maybe by you too. But I hope it was helpful and peace profound. God bless.